Welcome back, ladies and gentlemen, to another beautiful PowerPoint slide. This time, we are talking RLCSX, the grid. What do the points do? No one seems to know what the points do. So let's explain exactly what is going on behind the scenes for the grid in terms of RLCSX. Generally speaking, you don't have to worry too much about the grid points. Like RLCS X points are the main thing. Right? That'll qualify you for any major. It'll qualify you for any world championship. That is the cream of the crop. The grid, honestly, you can look at it as 9 weeks where the org gets to put on a stream and have $10,000 weeklies. Now, if these teams are in form, it will influence seeding, and we'll get into that in a little bit. But let's begin. Can grid points qualify you for a major? Short answer, right now, and this is all for split one. These things could change going into split 2, split 3. But for now, short answer, yes, but very unlikely. Whoever has the most points at the end of 9 weeks of the grid will get a wild card spot into the major. We're not talking too much about the major yet. When we talk about the major, I can explain why this doesn't pass down to like number 2 in grid points and stuff like that, what the reason behind it is. But it's only if they haven't earned it through RLCSX. Now, generally speaking, if you have the top 16 teams from Season 9 battling out every week in the grid, very likely whoever does the best there is going to also be very good in RLCSX, so they probably won't have to worry about this. So very likely, no one from the grid will qualify to a major. Once again, this does not pass down to number 2. It would just go to the next team in RLCSX points. That's all you need to know there. But that begs the question, then what do these points do? What's the point? Grid points will influence seeding in regionals and majors. So once you have qualified, or like for regional, once you've qualified for a major, majors through RLCSX points, regionals through qualifier tournaments, then your seed will be based on your RLCSX points plus 1/3 of your grid points. The reason why it's 1/3 is because there's 9 grids, there's 3 regionals. You don't get the same amount of points in grid anyway. Like RLCSX, I think for first is 351 for split 1. For grid, I think it's 201. But still, like the whole point is RLCSX points should matter more anyway. So that's why the grid points are reduced to 1/3 because, again, 9 tournaments compared to 3. But also, they don't get as many points anyway because it shouldn't influence it as much. The next thing, teams not in the grid will have their seed locked after calculating for their RLCSX points only. Now, this is very important to me because, especially for split 1, who knows what we do yet for split 2 or split 3. And my capitalization is all over the place in these things. And I'm also having a hard time picking a font. As you can tell, all my things are now changing fonts. But anyway, this was very important because for this first split, you really didn't get a choice if you could be in the grid or not. It wasn't based on, like, it was based on Season 9, but obviously if you're a good team now, you never had that chance. Obviously in Europe, there was one spot in that one qualifier. But in split 2, at least, you'll have more chances to do that because the bottom 6 will go into a tournament with the top 6, the next top 6 from the RLCSX points, and also 4 teams from an open qualifier. The top 6 after that tournament of 16 will then go into the grid. So maybe this changes in split 2 or split 3. We don't know yet. We're just waiting it out. But for split 1, you really didn't get an opportunity to go into the grid, so it feels unfair if a team who's not in the grid does well in the RLCSX, but then they keep getting really poor seeding because they were not in the grid and they don't get that 1/3 grid points bonus. So here's an example. Vitality Stormtroopers and Triple Trouble. They're placing RLCSX points. Now, these numbers are all made up. So RLCSX points, Vitality gets 110, Stormtroopers gets 100, Triple Trouble has 80. Now, after taking their grid 1/3 points, Triple Trouble just won one, so they're going to bump up a little bit. So they get 70 points there. Vitality gets 30. Stormtroopers, they're not in the grid, so they don't worry about that. So before the grid points, the seeds would have been Vitality 10th, Stormtrooper 11th, Triple Trouble 12th. Once you total up the RLCSX and grid points, you can see Triple Trouble would be in first, followed by Vitality, followed by Stormtroopers. But because Stormtroopers is not in the grid, their seed will be hard locked after the RLCSX points. So keep that in mind. Those teams they will only be compared with the RLCS points because, again, they don't have any grid points. But all the other teams that are in the grid will be compared based on RLCS points and 1/3 of their grid points. That's all the way throughout, all 16. Like if someone's in first compared to someone in 20th or whatever, that depends on how many teams make a regional, whatever. They will always be compared with both those points. So say two teams are next to each other, that makes a lot more sense, right? Say Vitality and Dignitas are right next to each other in 9 and 10, but Vitality's been doing really good in the grid and they were 10th or something, then they would bump ahead of Dignitas. But if there is a team not in the grid between them, they lock into their spot, but the other teams can still shift. So instead of Vitality dropping 1 spot here behind Triple Trouble, they actually drop 2. They swap with Triple Trouble because they can't take over the Stormtroopers seat. Stormtroopers, again, hard locked. I hope that makes sense. Might be a little bit confusing, but I think we'll get around to it. That table kind of helps you there a little bit. So again, then for this case, they would flip completely. So Triple Trouble would be the 10th seed. Stormtroopers, they would still have their 11th, and Vitality would have number 12 going into whatever tournament is next. Now, the other thing to note is NA Regional 1 seeding is a little bit different because there hasn't been an RLCS X event yet. So teams outside the grid don't really get that opportunity to make their name, basically. So what we'll do is there's pools of qualification, right? There's the 10 RLCS teams. They already got their top 10 seeds. Then you get the 8 upper bracket seeds from the qualifiers, the 8 lower bracket seeds, the 4 last chance qualifier teams that win in round 1, the 2 last chance qualifier teams that win in round 2. Those tiers will stay the same. Going forward, after these regionals, these tiers will be abolished. It'll be based on RLCS X and grid points for seeding. Like, sure, the 10 RLCS teams will get that automatic lock spot, but their seed can be influenced based on their RLCS X points. And if you qualify, even if you're qualifying the last chance qualifier, say Magnifico qualifies in the last chance qualifier, they will still get a major bump up in their seed because of their RLCS X points, as long as they make it. So we won't worry about where you finish later on through the qualifiers, because that comes down to one day, and it's like, well, why should that matter more than Magnifico's 3rd place finish in a regional, right? So for Regional 1, this will matter for NA because, again, there has not been an RLCSX, so it's hard to compare teams. So the 10 RLCS teams will be ranked based on their grid results. So there's 2 grids that'll happen before Regional 1, so you get seeds 1 through 10. The 8 upper bracket teams, it could be a few of those rival series teams that are in the grid. They will always win the tiebreaker over the other teams that are not in the grid when they're in the same tier, but they would have anyway, because the other way we seeded the Europe Regional 1 was you just go by whatever their closed qualifier seed was entering the tournament, which basically just means how good of an offseason there was. Now, for the rival series teams, they got the extra benefit of just being 1 through 6, no matter what their offseason was, but that's just their bonus that they get. So that would be exactly the same here. The only difference is the rival series teams would normally be 1 through 6 based on rival series results, but now with the grid points, they would actually, so they could flip-flop one another, but they can't finish below a team that was not in the grid or not in the rival series unless they're in a different tier. If, say, KC Pioneers finish in the last chance qualifier, well, there's going to be teams above them in seeding because they finished in the last chance qualifier. But that's exactly the same that we did for Europe Regional 1. Now, one of the things to keep in mind for this Swiss, we talked about this a while ago, is the Swiss has pools of seeds with some RNG elements in there. So, like, we're splitting hairs a bit when you're talking about seeds, and those hairs won't matter as much. They could matter, but generally speaking, they won't matter as much because there's more RNG matchups in these pools for now. So, but that's basically it. That's what grid points do. They will influence your seeding in regionals and majors, and I wanted to show you the math, what we decided to go with for those cases. So basically, say a major had 100 teams, which obviously is not the case. You would take the 100 RLCS X teams in points, even if 101 had 1 million grid points, and 100 was also in the grid, I should go over here, and they got like no points. The 101 would not pass the 100 because you qualify based on RLCS X points. Once you qualify, then your seed can change based on your grid points. So the main thing is RLCS points mean basically everything. Grid points influence some seed choices as we go on. But that's basically it. I hope you guys enjoyed the video. I hope for the hardcore fans, I know you guys want to know all the ins and outs. And I know there's been a lot of questions about that. So when I talk about majors and all that, we will talk about that next. But for now, we got the grid points out of the way. So I hope you guys enjoyed, and we'll see you next time. Bye-bye.